Okay guys, welcome to your first remote learning session. Today we're going to be looking at localization of function. So learning objectives for today are to understand that different areas of the brain carry out different functions, and to identify some of the regions of the brain that you need to know for your exam and the functions which are associated with them. So localization of function basically just refers to this idea that different areas of the brain are specialized for very specific functions. You've looked at this a little bit in terms of the lobes of the brain, but today we're going to go a little bit deeper into more specific areas. So while modern research uses neuroimaging, so techniques like fMRI or PET scans, which you don't learn about on this course, early research often made more use of case studies. So the case study that we're going to look at today is the case of Phineas Gage. So Phineas Gage was a rail construction worker in the 1800s, and in 1848 there was an explosion while he was working on the railway line, which launched a steel rod completely through his head. So you can see here it kind of went up through his face and then came out the top of his head. So this is the steel rod, and it launched up through the front part of his brain and out the other side. So this caused massive damage to his frontal lobe, which you've looked at. And although Phineas survived, he showed massive changes in his personality. So he became very disinhibited, which basically means that he had no kind of self-control. He also became prone to fits of very intense anger. And based on this very radical shift in personality, we concluded that the frontal lobe was responsible for personality. So the specific brain regions which you need to be aware of are the motor cortex, the somatosensory cortex, the visual cortex, and the auditory cortex. These two are pretty self-explanatory. So the motor cortex is located in the frontal lobe. So this is actually the back portion of the frontal lobe here, this kind of pinky purple bit. This is responsible for deliberate movement. So obviously we can contrast that with the cerebellum, which, as we know, is responsible for unconscious movement, so things like balancing. This is deliberate movement, so for example, the fact I'm deciding to move my hand to move the mouse. The somatosensory cortex is basically the part of the brain in the parietal lobe, so this is now the front of the parietal lobe, this yellow bit, which is responsible for physical sensation. So somato or somatic just means to do with the body, so somatosensory means body sense, so sensing in the body. So it makes sense that the part of the brain responsible for receiving physical sensation from the body is right next to the part of the brain which is responsible for moving the body. Visual cortex, quite self-explanatory, is located in the back at the occipital lobe. This is responsible for processing visual information from the eyes. And the auditory cortex is located in the, that should say temporal lobe. So the auditory cortex is located in the temporal lobe and is responsible for processing auditory information, which, if you think about it, does make sense, because if the front of your head would be here, this would be around your forehead, your eyes would be around here, so your ears would kind of be just over the auditory cortex. Okay, so the motor cortex and somatosensory cortex are actually arranged in quite a logical order, so this is kind of how they're arranged. So as you can see, you've got your fingers, which are then arranged next to your hand, which is next to your wrist, forearm, elbow, and your upper arm. So it's laid out in a similar way to how your body is laid out. And you can also see that there's a much bigger portion of the somatosensory and motor cortex for the fingers compared to, say, the hand and your entire arm here. That's because you need more brain tissue available for parts of the brain, parts of the body which are responsible for more dexterous movement. So you need to have more fine motor control of your fingers to be able to carry out things like typing, whereas moving your arms, you only really need to move them in kind of general directions. Okay, so the last two areas of the brain that you need to know about are Broca's area and Wernicke's area. So starting with Broca's area. Broca's area is located in the left frontal lobe, and it's only found on the left frontal lobe, not in the right at all. This part of the brain is thought to be responsible for speech production, so the ability to actually produce speech. Broca discovered this by studying the brain of a patient who could only say the word tan, and because of that the patient was called Tan. So all he could say was just tan, 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 tan. He could change the tone of voice, so if he was asking a question he might say tan, 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 but he could only say that one word, tan. he studied several other patients who all had the same kind of issue where they couldn't produce speech properly. Not always as severely as only being able to say one word. So after they died, he carried out a post-mortem examination of their brain and found that there was brain damage or lesions to that specific area of the brain. So people who have issues with producing speech are said to be suffering from Broca's aphasia, also called non-fluent aphasia, because of the fact that if they can talk, it tends to be non-fluent. It's very difficult for them to produce speech.
Can you tell us your name?
Mike Caputo.
And Mike, when was your stroke?
I was 7 years ago.
Okay.
And
what did you used to do?
Worked Autodesk, seven sales, and worldwide, and very good. Yeah.
Okay. And who are you looking at over there when you turn your head?
That's my wife.
Okay. And why is she helping you to talk?
She's a speech.
So you have trouble with your speech?
Yeah.
And what's that called?
Aphasia.
All right.
So, as you could see from that video, the gentleman still had his cognitive abilities there. He was still able to understand the questions being asked of him, and he was still able to try and answer, but he just couldn't find the words to express himself properly. So, based on that, we can conclude that the damage done to his Broca's area is what is responsible for his inability to produce speech properly. So moving on to the last brain area we need to look at in today's lesson, Wernicke's area is responsible for speech comprehension. So this is all about understanding the meanings behind speech. Wernicke's area is located once again in the left hemisphere, so same as Broca's area, only located on the left hemisphere of the brain, and this time it is on the kind of top back area of the temporal lobe. So once again, Wernicke carried out post-mortem examinations on people who showed symptoms of what he called Wernicke's aphasia. So people who could produce speech fluidly, but it didn't have any real meaning behind it. It was nonsense. So Wernicke's aphasia, as I said, is a similar type of thing. However, instead of an inability to produce speech organically, it's now an inability to understand the meanings behind speech. But the best way to understand what I mean by that is to observe this person who is showing fluent aphasia or Wernicke's aphasia.
Hi Byron, how are you?
I'm happy. Are you pretty? You look good.
What are you doing today?
We stayed with the water over here at the moment and talked with the people for them over there. They're diving for them at the moment. They'll save in the moment. He'll have water very soon for him. With luck for him.
So we're on a cruise and we're about to
We
get to
will
Juneau.
store it right here and they'll save their hands right there for them.
And what were we just doing with the iPad?
Right at the moment they don't show a darn thing.
With the iPad that we were doing. We like here?
I'd like my change for me and change hands for me. It would happen. I would talk with Donna sometimes. We're out with them. Other people are working with them. I'm very happy with them.
Good.
This girl was very good and happy. And I play golf and hit other trees. We play out with the hands. We save a lot of hands on hold for us, other hands. I don't know what you get, but I talk with a lot of hand for him. Sometime. Am I talk of any more to saying?
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it, and I hope the world lasts for you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Bye-bye.
Have a good day.
So as you could see in that video, the gentleman was able to produce speech very easily. There was no effort involved in actually speaking, but what he was saying didn't make sense. He wasn't answering the questions which were being asked of him, and the statements he was making were kind of disconnected and didn't really mean anything in particular. So this is due to the fact that Wernicke's area is responsible for understanding the meaning behind speech. So just to recap, Broca's aphasia is issues with language production, but solid understanding of the meanings behind language. Contrast that with Wernicke's aphasia, where you have very smooth, easy language production, but difficulties with understanding the meaning, so difficulty with language comprehension. So what I'd like you to do is draw an image of the brain and then label and describe the function of these areas, the areas we've looked at today. The reason I'd like you to do that is because it's often come up in the exams where you've had to be able to identify the areas of the brain based on just a picture. So this will be very beneficial for you to have in your notes. Do keep in mind that Broca's area and Wernicke's area are only found on the left hemisphere of the brain, so you're going to have to draw it facing this way. This is the front of the brain here, this is the back. If you are using the cat book, then you'll be able to use page 128 to help you. The Green Hair Girl book doesn't have this section, so what I will do is I'll leave some links to websites in the Google Classrooms page, or you can just go back through the PowerPoint to look there. And once you've done that, what I'd like you to do is just complete the multiple choice questions, which I'm going to put up on the Google Classroom as well. So finally, if you have found this video helpful, then please just leave a little comment just saying that you found it helpful. If you didn't find it helpful, you can leave a comment just saying this wasn't particularly helpful for me. That just lets me know whether or not to make more videos going through the PowerPoints like this, or whether I'm just wasting my time. So do let me know if you need more videos like this, or if you find them helpful. I'm more than happy to keep making them as we go forward. Awesome. Have a nice quarantine, guys.